Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is August 12th, 2024, Monday, August 12th, 2024. And if you hear unusual noises, I'm doing this in the middle of the day, and I have various animals walking around, so if you hear something weird, it's one of them. So, anyway, let's go off to our first story. It's going to be out of Stranger Than Fiction stories, and, this is one of my favorite things, cold cases, and this is titled Fishkill Jane Doe. On March 20th, 1980, Thomas Newman and Stanley Odell, maintenance workers, found a steamer trunk behind a dumpster at the Hudson View Apartments. Naturally, they assumed someone wanted it to go out with the trash. Then they noticed blood on the outside. The trunk was old, green, and beat up with black trim and brass fittings. There were stickers on the outside for the French ocean liner Flandre, and others from the Cunard lines. It appeared the trunk had been tampered with because there was tape around the seams, and some of it had been pulled off. The men tried to lift it, but found it was too heavy. So they opened it, and inside was the nude body of a white, young woman with her head and hands missing. Later, Newman told newspapers he was having nightmares. He said, "I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw the white thing with no head." Police responded to the apartment complex located off Route 9D in Fishkill, New York, about 70 miles from Manhattan. Authorities searched the wooded area nearby for the missing body parts, but found nothing. The corpse had been fitted into a space that measured 21 inches wide, 37 inches long, and 14 inches deep. Inside it was lined in blue fabric. Troopers interviewed the occupants of the 500-plus apartment complex for any leads in the case. It was believed the trunk was left there between noon and 10 p.m. on March 18th. The body was originally examined by Dutchess County Medical Examiner Dr. John Supple, and then was autopsied by Dr. Franz McMahon at Vassar Hospital. It was estimated she was 5'3" to 5 feet 6 inches in height, weighed about 140 pounds, and had dark body hair. She wore a size 12 or 14, had a 26-inch waist, wore a size 34B bra, and had type O negative blood. Her uterus exam indicated she wasn't pregnant but had given birth at one time. The ME found no marks of violence on the body. However, the head was amputated between C3 and C4 level, and the hands were amputated at the wrist joints. Excuse me, I gotta turn on a fan. It's the middle of the day here and it's hot. Anyway, the heads and hands were cut carefully, but not surgically. The body had been virtually drained of blood, and it was very clean. She had small feet, about a size 4 or 5, which was unusual for a woman of that height. The trunk was traced to a Greenwich Village resident artist named June Leaf. She told police that she had lost track of the trunk in 1960. The stickers corresponded to when she had crossed from New York to Le Havre, France, and returned on the Cunard lines in the 1950s. The police followed many leads, and they tried to match the corpse to any missing women reports from the eastern United States. Without fingerprints or teeth to compare, the limited technology at that time did not permit any identification to be made of the remains, which is what the killer intended when they mutilated the body. However, it was inevitable the body would be found. One could interpret it as a killer wanted the dead woman to be found, or he was lazy, or he had run out of time in which to dispose of the body. The case became cold, and she became known as Dutchess County Jane Doe or Fishkill Jane Doe. During those years, there were similar murders of other women. In April 1976, by the way, this is of course prior to her discovery, but this is reference that already there were similar type of murders. In April of 1976, a woman's body, missing the head and one or both hands, was found floating in Greenwood Lake in Warwick, Orange County, New York. 3 months before Fishkill Jane Doe was found, firemen were called to a fire at the Travel Inn Motel on the west side of Manhattan. A fireman carried a body outside and set it down ready to administer mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Then he realized that would be impossible because the body had no head. The hands were also missing. A second corpse was found as well, also missing the hands and the head. The women were believed to be in their late teens or early 20s. The lower portions of the bodies had been doused with flammable liquid and set on fire by whoever killed them. Officers said the amputations had been done with surgical skill, perhaps using a scalpel. 2 sets of name-brand jeans, blouses, and platform shoes were found neatly piled in the bathtub, and a fur coat was next to one of the burning beds. The room had been rented 4 days before by a man who it was assumed to have been using an alias. One was later identified as a prostitute from Trenton, New Jersey, but the murderer of both women remained unknown. In 2011, the Dutchess County Jane Doe case was entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, aka NamUs. The FBI was able to obtain a DNA sample from the mutilated body and handed it over to a private lab which created a DNA profile for the victim. Her full name was Anna L. Pappalardo Blake, age 44. She was reported missing on March 18, 1980. She worked as a receptionist at the Vidal Sassoon Salon at 160 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan and was last seen at her place of employment about 6 p.m. State police were able to positively identify the victim as Pappalardo Blake on May 26, 2022. However, the identification was not publicly announced until several months later. No one has ever been arrested in connection to Pappalardo's murder because it seems the murderer was dead by the time she was identified. However, there is a coincidence which is hard to overlook. 2 years after the discovery of the mutilated body inside the green trunk, the case had grown cold and no one could have anticipated that the discovery on August 3, 1982, of a woman's body wrapped in a mattress would end up being connected to the case of Fishkill Jane Doe. The body had a telephone cord tied around the midsection. However, she was toothless and appeared to have worn dentures which were missing. She had no urine in her bladder. There was a bruise on her leg that was inflicted 5 to 20 minutes before her death. The ME believed she was strangled to death at about 11 p.m. on August 1, 1982. There was no evidence of sexual assault. Jerry Risco identified the bodies as that of his sister, Marianne Blake. His suspicions against his brother-in-law, John, for some reason called himself Rick Blake, led police to the apartment the couple shared, where they confirmed through the use of fingerprints the dead woman was Marianne Blake. She had returned home 3 days before after spending a week away with her mother due to an argument with her husband. John Rick Blake was the one-time husband of Ann Pappalardo Blake. They had married in 1977 after her first husband of 20 years passed away. Marianne lived with her husband and his 13-year-old daughter, Tiffany. Occasionally, her daughter, Gina, 17, would stay at their 5th-floor apartment on Monroe Boulevard. They had been married 2 years and were known to quarrel frequently. Blake was an electrical engineer and a building maintenance supervisor for 2 Manhattan real estate management firms. On August 3rd, police questioned Blake, who told police he and his wife went to sleep at about 11 p.m. When he woke up the next morning, she was gone. He told police he had taken the sheets they had slept on to Lee's Laundry Service. When the police obtained them, they discovered one of them was stained with urine and type O blood. Blake, 50, left his Long Beach apartment on August 9th with no forwarding address. He faked his suicide, but police found him living in an East 65th Street apartment in Manhattan under another name. Residents of the apartment were his daughter Tiffany, his daughter's girlfriend, and the girlfriend's mother. He had grown a beard. He told police he had left because he was being harassed by one of the detectives. He was arrested almost 2 months after his wife's body was discovered. While awaiting trial, Blake told Michael Negro, a cellmate in the Nassau County Jail, that he killed his wife after they had an argument. He kicked her in the leg and punched her in the face, knocking her dentures out of her mouth. He strangled her until she urinated in the bed. This was corroborated by the ME's report. He also told Negro that if acquitted, he would kill the prosecutor and the 2 Nassau detectives who investigated the case. During the trial, Ann Pappalardo's family sought out prosecutors to learn of her whereabouts. She was last seen by her son on March 19, 1980. When Ann disappeared, Rick Blake told police his wife left home after an argument and refused to tell him where she was going. The couple has separated but were in the process of reconciling. She disappeared the day she was to meet Blake to hunt for an apartment. His first wife died of cancer in 1967 and his second wife was living in Canada. What was telling was that Blake never sought a divorce from Ann Pappalardo before marrying Marianne, which was 6 months after his third wife disappeared. It was as if he knew she was not alive anymore. 4 days after Pappalardo disappeared, the family received a telegram from Ann Blake saying that she was under great pressure and needed to get her head together. See you in a couple of weeks, the telegram concluded. But the family never believed the telegram was really from her. She would never leave like that without telling us where she was going, the son told police. On March 23, 1984, Blake was convicted of murder in the second degree and was sentenced to a term of imprisonment of 20 years to life. He appealed his conviction and was denied in 1987. After Blake filed several motions in state court, he was prohibited in 1990 to attack his conviction on any ground raised in prior motions. Rick Blake died in 2005, and it seems there's a good chance he killed his third wife. In another strange twist, the Green Acres Mall parking lot where Marianne Blake's body was found was the same one where Diane Cusick was discovered in 1968. She was a victim of a serial killer, Richard Cottingham. The case was solved in 2022 when Cottingham confided to Dr. Peter Ronke that he frequented a drive-in movie theater next to Green Acres Mall. A DNA match was made to Cottingham. However, in 1980, Cottingham was behind bars, so he could not be Marianne Blake's killer. Cottingham murdered and raped at least 18 young girls between 1967 and 1980. He earned the moniker of the New York Ripper, the Torso Killer, and Times Square Killer. In 2009, he told a journalist he had committed between 80 to 100 perfect murders of women in different parts of the United States. In 1966, he worked at Blue Cross with Rodney Alcala, who would go on to become the dating game serial killer. I mean, what are the odds on that? And let me tell you, this whole thing could have been unwrapped. From the moment, see, he had never divorced Ann Pappalardo. And 3 months later, he's marrying this lady right here, Marianne. But I'm thinking, if her family says, wait a minute, you're getting married? When did you get a divorce? How did this happen? Right there, that right there is a telltale. Like, in other words, he knew he didn't need to get a divorce because he knew she was dead. But her family should have followed up. It's like, okay, so either you're a bigamist because you're still married to Anne, or what is that you know that makes you think you don't need to get a divorce? But it's all in the rearview mirror right now. But yeah, it took that many years. This guy, his first wife dies. His second wife is in Canada. Who knows what story she could have told. This poor lady's his third wife. She ends up stuffing in the trunk the missing head and hands. All right. Becomes a Jane Doe for how long? 40 years, something like that. Kills his fourth wife, but I guess this time, he was caught. And it's like, it makes me wonder, who else did he, that wasn't directly tied to him, did he? I mean, this is not like a normal thing. Very chilling as far as being that savage about it. All right. Next story, also out of Stranger Than Fiction stories, is titled The Legend of the Lost Ship. There's a legend of a ghostly vessel which is said to be a portent of death if sighted. There are different versions as to what is the name of the ship. This is one of them. April 12th, 1812, Maine. Charles Jose and George Leverett of Portland were riding along Middle Road to Yarmouth. Both young men had been friends since childhood. Their plans were to order a full-rigged ship for the West Indian trade. Both were barely out of their teen years, and Leverett's father and Jose's uncle were financing the venture. At noon, they arrived at the inn at South Freeport, where they planned to eat dinner before going to the shipyard. That night, they both fell in love with Sarah Soule, the innkeeper's daughter. After dinner, Leverett went to the shipyard, but Jose begged out, saying he was feeling sick. Instead, he pursued Sarah, who made it clear she was not interested in him. The shipwright was Mr. Soule, unknown what his relationship was to Sarah, who promised to start on the vessel. Within a few days, when the keel was laid, Everett proposed to name the ship the Sarah. Jose agreed reluctantly, but he didn't participate in the planning of the vessel like before. On the trip back to Portland, they quarreled violently. Jose accused Leverett of taking unfair advantage and winning over Sarah Soule. On the bridge at Yarmouth, he tried to force Leverett's horse over the rail into the waters of the Royal River. He didn't succeed in murdering his rival, but afterward Jose disappeared from Portland. The following autumn, the Sarah was ready to launch. Captain Leverett had proposed to Sarah Soul, and they chose the day of the launching as their wedding day. The whole area was ready to celebrate the double festivities. There were so many people attending the wedding that instead of the church, it was to be held at the shipyard. The elderly ladies of the town shook their head and said this new location boded only ill luck for the couple. The clergyman heard of the mutterings and, being a superstitious man, refused to conduct the ceremony at the new hour. The nuptials were delayed since the new clergyman was summoned from Yarmouth. The wedding finally took place. However, by October, the Sarah had not set out on her maiden voyage. Since Captain Leverett had trouble assembling a crew, only 5 Freeport men had signed on, and the rest were finally recruited from Portland and Harpswell. This difficulty in getting the crew stemmed from rumors of bad luck connected to Leverett and his ship. About this time, a strange sighting was reported. It was a foreign bark, painted black and flying no flag, between Cape Elizabeth and the mouth of the Kennebec. Fishermen said she was pierced for cannon. Since smugglers were in the area, not too many questions were asked. However, the ship sailed into Portland Harbor on the same day the Sarah arrived from Freeport to load her cargo and head to the West Indies. The black ship was a Don Pedro Salazar, captained by Charles Jose. He purchased a ship that was stuck on a reef in Havana Harbor and recruited his crew from the island. Captain Jose repaired the ship and purchased an American registry in order to do business. Sarah Leverett planned to return to Freeport the following day by the packet sloop that traveled between Portland and Bangnak. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. However, at the last minute, she traveled overland by stage. Once the Bangnak packet left port, it was overtaken by what was described as a whaleboat manned by foreign sailors off Clapboard Island. The whaleboat's officer demanded to know where Mrs. Leverett was. Finally, they convinced the man she was not on board. The skipper reported the incident to the authorities, but no action was taken. The Don Pedro Salazar sold her cargo, and she supposedly left for Boston. However, she crept to Woody Mark Island that night, took on the rest of the crew and cannons, and waited until the Sarah put out to sea. She trailed after the Sarah as she sailed south, all the way to Hole in the Wall, a well-known naval landmark that was a rocky point at the south end of Abaco, which is the most northern of the Bahama Islands. Ships from Europe and the Americas, when bound to the town of New Providence, Bahamas, Havana, or the Mexican Gulf, would stop at the island instead of using the old Bahama Channel. This spot was favored by the Providence privateers who smuggled contraband to Havana and other Spanish settlements. The area had deep but transparent water, which allowed easy maneuvering of ships if they arrived in the daylight hours. By now, Captain Leverett was anxious, but he kept his usual course for Matanzas Bay in the Florida Straits, which was known to be pirate-infested. He stopped at Nassau and reported to the British Admiralty the circumstances of the strange black ship that pursued him. Once Leverett left the port of Nassau, the Don Pedro Salazar hoisted the Jolly Roger and fired on the Sarah. A battle took place, and when the pirates boarded the Sarah, the crew and officers were dead except for Captain Leverett. At this moment, and many miles away, Sarah Leverett saw unexplained pinpricks of blood pop up on her hand. She screamed and said she knew her husband was dead. The pirates ransacked the Sarah and tied Captain Leverett to the foot of the mainmast. Then a strange thing happened, which kept old wives' tongues wagging for many a year. The dead crew supposedly came back to life, braced the sails, and started the Sarah back to home port. Leverett had lost consciousness and could not tell what happened on the strange return voyage. On a late afternoon in November in South Harpswell, a full-rigged ship came round Mark Island. It was said the Harpswell crew had brought their ship home. The ship skillfully avoided the rocks and reef in the channel. The harbor pilots saw the ship's upper works were shot away, her sails were full of holes, and not a man of her crew was in sight except for the helmsman. At Potts Harbor, the ship stopped but no anchor fell. The one undamaged lifeboat was lowered, and Captain Leverett was rowed ashore and laid on the grass. The lifeboat returned to the ship just as a cloud of fog rolled in and obscured Haskell's Island. When the fog cleared, the ship and the rowboat had vanished. The captain was found to be gravely ill with fever, and his logbook was left next to him, with the last entry reflecting the change of course for Nassau. The story of the Sarah passed through 3 generations. From this event, a superstitious tale sprang that whenever death was about to occur on Harpswell Neck or on one of the Harpswell Islands, the dead ship of Harpswell would come driving into Maraconic Sound on her way to Parts Harbor. The vessel would arrive in a cloud of fog, and only those concerned with the portent could see her. The ship is always seen under full spread of sail, and bears down upon our objective regardless of wind and tide. She is usually seen at sundown or in the early evening. Her appearance is an image of whatever vessel is overdue. The ghost ship disappears just as she seems to be crashing headlong into the wharf. The last recorded visit of the dead ship to Harpswell was in the 1880s. A visitor to Harpswell House was on the veranda and saw a full-rigged ship sailing into port. He took his eyes off of it for a moment and it disappeared. The legend inspired John Greenleaf Whittier's poem, The Dead Ship of Harpswell, which was penned in 1866. And a passage is it, from grey sea fog, from icy drift, from peril and from pain, the homebound fisher greets thy lights of 100-harbored Maine. How much truth is there in this story? The Leverets were a prominent family, not in Maine but in Massachusetts. John Leverett served as governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony. The surname of Jose was known in Maine, especially during those years this story took place, however, none with the first name of Charles. There were also several from the Soule family who lived during this time period. An alternate version of the dead ship of Harpswell is the privateer Dash, which was lost with all hands during the same time period this story took place. So there you go. Did it grow into an urban legend like a lot of other stories out of a real story? All right. And of course, it wouldn't be the first time, 2 men fight over 1 woman and the loser says, I'm going to get even one way or the other. And then, from there, who knows what happened. But anyway, next story is going to be out of the travel. And it's titled 7 Airports Known for Paranormal Activity. Have you ever felt a strange energy in an airport? A chill down your spine as you walk through the terminal? You are not alone, literally. There's something inherently unsettling about airports. Perhaps it's the constant hum of machinery, the vast echoing spaces, or the strange assortment of people passing through. Either way, some airports with darker histories than most are breeding grounds for the unexplained. Think about it. Airports are liminal spaces. They exist between worlds where people are in state of transition, suspended between departure and arrival. This liminal quality, combined with the sheer volume of human energy passing through, can create a potent brew for paranormal activity. From ghostly passengers to eerie occurrences, these strange airports have their fair share of spine-chilling tales. With that, take a flight into the world's most haunted airport and delve into the shadowy corners they hide. Number 7, Denver International Airport. Denver International Airport is more than just a place to catch a flight. It's become a hub for conspiracy theories, paranormal activity, and urban legends. The airport's vast underground tunnels, coupled with its eerie murals and mysterious construction delays, have fueled the speculation about hidden chambers and secret government projects. One TikTok user claimed that after exploring hidden corridors and rooms within the airport, and he also, posted a video, showed creepy endless hallways and peculiar spaces, fueling a wave of speculation about the dreaded backrooms and igniting fear among viewers. Then, the next one, Chicago O'Hare International, number 6. Chicago O'Hare International Airport is a bustling hub for travelers and offers cheap flights around the world. But beneath its modern facade lies a darker history. The tragic crash of American Airlines Flight 191 in 1979 cast a long shadow over the airport. This devastating event, claiming the lives of 271 people, is often linked to the numerous paranormal experiences reported at O'Hare. In the aftermath of the crash, strange occurrences began to unfold. Eyewitnesses reported seeing ghostly figures, hearing unexplained noises, and experiencing an eerie atmosphere around the crash flight. Besides the paranormal activities And howling dogs are rumors that the airport's construction led to the displacement of a local cemetery. All right. Number 5, Fresno Chandler Executive Airport in California. Numerous reports of paranormal activity have transformed the airport into a local legend. From ghostly apparitions walking through walls to the spectral figure of an elderly man seemingly observing phantom flights from the control tower, the airport is teeming with eerie encounters. Strange noises, unexplained movement of objects, and an overall unsettling atmosphere have made Chandler Airport a hotspot for paranormal investigators. Even the airport's kitchen has its share of ghostly activity. Staff members have reported inexplicable movement of objects, suggesting a paranormal presence in the heart of the once bustling facility. It was opened in 1929. Besides the old control tower, the old terminal wall is the most haunted spot. There have been reports of people going through the wall. All right. Number 4, Duluth International Airport, Minnesota. Beyond Duluth International Airport terminals and operation lies a chilling history of paranormal activity. Security guards have reported seeing a spectral figure of a woman believed to be a victim of a violent crime that occurred near the airport. Legend has it that the woman was fatally stabbed and her assailant fled into the airport's terminals. Her spirit is said to wander the terminals, eternally searching for her killer. Employees report unexplained alarms, doors mysteriously opening and closing, and an overall sense of unease, all attributed to the restless ghost. It was opened in 1930, and the woman roams the entire airport, setting off alarms of mysteriously opening and closing doors. Number 3, Savannah Hilton Head International Airport in Georgia. Local legend tells of 2 spectral figures often seen near the northern end of the runway at the Savannah Hilton Head International Airport, particularly at dusk. These apparitions are believed to be the ghost of Richard and Catherine Dotson, the original landowners whose graves were inadvertently incorporated into Savannah's airport construction. Unable to relocate the Dotsons' remains, airport authorities made the difficult decision to build over their graves. The airport was opened in 1994. The former owners' graves are cemented into the runway and their gravestones are clearly visible. That right there, if you're looking at the video version, that's so sweet. It's like, there you go. Number 2 is Daniel K. Inouye International Airport in Hawaii. Oahu is no stranger to creepy haunted hotspots, but perhaps one of the most unassuming is Honolulu's Daniel K. Inouye International Airport, which is more than just a gateway to paradise. Beneath its tropical facade lies a darker, more mysterious side. Local legends speak of a ghostly woman who referred to as the Lady in Waiting who haunts the airport. Some believe she is the ghost of a heartbroken woman who tragically ended her life after a failed love affair. Beside the Lady in Waiting, people have described feeling a suffocating presence while resting, as if something or someone is trying to cut off their air supply. The airport was opened in 1927, and the gate that leads to the runway is where many people have allegedly seen the Lady in Waiting. Number 1, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport in Georgia. 2 cemeteries, Flat Rock and Hart, lie within Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport's sprawling grounds. These forgotten burial grounds, swallowed by aviation's relentless expansion, have given rise to a host of paranormal encounters. At least 90 people are buried beneath the airport. Employees and passengers have reported strange occurrences, from unexplained noises to unsettled feelings suggesting the presence of restless spirits. Hidden in plain sight, the cemeteries cast a long shadow over the airport, transforming it into something more than just a transportation hub. Learning not to panic will help you brave Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta, the world's busiest airport. It opened in 1926. The fact that there are at least 90 people buried around the runway is creepy enough. From ghostly apparitions to eerie occurrences, these airports have become hotspots for paranormal activity. Whether it's the chilling presence of a murdered woman, the spectral forms of long-departed souls, or the unsettling energy of forgotten burial grounds, these airports will challenge your perception of reality. So the next time you're waiting for your flight during a long layover, spare a thought for the ghostly passengers who might be sharing the terminal with you. And if you encounter anything unusual, keep calm and maybe avoid booking a late-night flight. Good idea. All right. Back to For our next story, Stranger Than Fiction Stories. This one's titled, if we're in the ghost, let's keep with the ghost, shall we? The Ghost of Bluebell Hill. In 1965, a bride-to-be on the eve of her wedding day lost her life, and since then, the stretch of road has been the scene of a phantom hitchhiker. Suzanne Ingrid Brown was living the dream of most young women. She met RAF photographer Brian Wetton in 1964 when he was posted to Australia. By 1965, they were engaged and set a wedding date for November of the same year. Wetton planned to leave the military, return to Australia, and open a photography shop with his new bride. Sue flew to England for the ceremony, which was to be held at St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church, Gillingham, Kent. She stayed with her future sister-in-law, and in the tradition of bidding farewell to her single days, she left with the three friends to celebrate before the big day. All was well until the midnight hour was approaching. Then the screech of grinding metal sounded out in the night. The Ford Cortina the girls were traveling in had a collision with a Jaguar on Bluebell Hill near Maidstone. It was raining and the lighting was murky on this stretch of the road known as A229. Judith Lingham and Patricia Ferguson, both 22, died on the scene. Suzanne Brown and Gillian Burchett were seriously injured and rushed to a local hospital. Suzanne died on November 24th, and Gillian was the only one to survive. 4 months after the accident, she was still hospitalized. Judith, who was a bridesmaid, had her dress in the vehicle since she had picked it up earlier in the day. Harry Backus, 29, who drove the Jaguar, was not badly hurt, but his companion, Sheila Bard, was held at the hospital but eventually discharged. Suzanne Brown had known sorrow since she was a small child. She lost her father, Patrick Brown, in 1945, and her mother, Ingrid, in 1946. 4-year-old Suzanne and her younger brother, Patrick, were given over to the care of a cousin. After the accident, her remains were returned to Australia, and she was buried in Enfield Memorial Park next to her parents. The reason for the accident has never been disclosed, and who was at fault for the crash. The tragedy would soon have been forgotten, and not for the spooky sightings by different motorists on the same stretch of road, leading some to believe it's haunted. This road's history is ancient. It followed the route of Roman road number 13, constructed for military use when Rome occupied Britain from 43 BC to 410 AD. It ran from Rochester to Hastings and was connected to the ironworks in the area. In 1728, it became a toll road between the two towns, and in 1760, it connected to Cranbrook. Bluebell Hill has an ancient megalithic structure crowning the chalk hill known as Kidd's Cody. Archaeologists dated back to 4000 BC, and it was part of a burial mound. Reports of a lady hitchhiker or a woman that would run across the road became well known, especially after the accident in 1965. However, there are rumors that this strange woman was seen as early as the 1930s. Interestingly, in 1962, Bob Van de Peer reported giving a ride to a girl on the hill, and when he turned around, she had disappeared from the backseat of the vehicle. This was before the fatal collision in 1965, leaving in doubt if the phantom hitchhiker were any of the girls killed in the accident. In 1969, another late-night traveler saw two persons walking toward him on the road. Suddenly, they disappeared, but on a second occasion, he saw them and witnessed a car drive right through the pair. In 1971, James Skeen described when he stopped for a girl in her 20s. He took her to Chatham, where she promptly disappeared. Through the years, there have been reports of a woman running across the road before she vanishes. Other stories of the typical female hitchhiker phenomena retold from around the world, where the woman disappears from the vehicle. In 1974, Morris Goodenough was driving on A229 when his headlight illuminated a girl walking out from the edge of the road. There was not enough time to stop, and as he feared, he found a girl prostrate on the road. He covered her with a blanket, carried her to a roadside, and left to find police after several cars failed to stop when he tried to wave them down. The only thing that was found was Goodenough's blanket when they returned to the scene. Fearing she had crawled off, tracker dogs were brought in, but neither scent or blood could be found. Hospital admissions found no records of treatment to match the girl, or that corresponded to a missing persons report. Ian Sharp was another person who had an encounter with a ghostly figure at A229 at the Bluebell Hill. Like other drivers, he described how a girl appeared without allowing any time to avoid hitting her. He described where she stared right into his eyes before he saw the body fall beneath his vehicle. Expecting to find a bloody mess under his tires, there was nothing there. It was difficult to dismiss the similarity of his experience with that of Goodenough in 1974, but both men did not describe a young woman as the three that were killed in 1965. However, Sharp's experience was a week away from the anniversary of the crash. Others just see a fleeting shadow-like figure race across the road without being able to distinguish who it is. In 1999, Bob Prowse was returning to Maidstone to his home in Hawkhurst. He was on the A229 when he saw a tall blond man standing in the road surrounded by a bluish glow, seconds before he swerved and braked. When he looked back, the road was empty. Not believing his eyes, he reversed to where the man had been standing. There was nothing there, he said. The strange thing is that he was just standing there, not moving, with his arms at his side, almost as though he was standing to attention. Mr. Prowse was the brother of David Prowse, who played Darth Vader in Star Wars. In 2014, a film titled The Ghost of Bluebell Hill was released about the Eerie story. Perhaps there is more than one ghost who is haunting the area of A229, products of other tragedies. In 1916, in a wood near Chatham, off the Maidstone Road, the nude and decomposed body of a woman was found. She was wearing only shoes and stockings. A pendant enclosing a bullet hung on a gold chain around her neck. It was believed this was the body of Emily Maria Trigg, 20, a servant who had been missing for over a month from the Rochester district. About 35 yards away, the police found her clothing bundled together with evidence they had been ripped off of her body. On the other side of the road, a handbag, a purse, and pair of gloves were found. Inside the handbag was a photograph of a soldier. Later, this was confirmed by her mother to be a friend of her daughter, a private in the Queen's Royal West Surrey Regiment. Emily's body was discovered by John Jennings, who was blackberrying with his two daughters. She was laying face down in the undergrowth. There were marks of great violence on her body, and it was believed she died from strangulation. She had a piece of calico torn from her clothing stuffed into her mouth. She had left her place of employment on August 6 to visit her widowed mother who lived on Bluebell Hill between Chatham and Maidstone. She never arrived or was seen alive again. Her route was a lonely one, which passed the wood in which she was later found. Her shoes showed signs she had been dragged a considerable distance. 2 months after her disappearance, the inquest into the death of Emily Trigg concluded and returned an open verdict. The police were unable, in the absence of clues, to carry the case further. Medical evidence showed there was an attempted rape, but it was impossible to state the cause of death. It was believed more than one person was involved in the crime. During the inquest, John Jennings, who had discovered the body, testified that he had been told by a farmer of seeing a young woman walking up Bluebell Hill with a soldier. This coincided with evidence given by Emily's employer, Miss Cooper. She testified that Emily told her she didn't like to be seen with a soldier who had spoken to her because he was a gentleman and she was only a country girl. However, when Emily was last seen, she had turned to walk to her mother's house by herself. On October 20th, 1916, Charles B. Hicks, a gunner in the Royal Garrison Artillery, was arrested at Winchester, where he was stationed, charged on suspicion of being involved in the murder of Emily Trigg. Within a day of his arrest, he was released. The details of why he was detained and then set free were not disclosed. A few days after Hicks' arrest, the body of a middle-aged tramp, who it was believed had died of exposure, was found in Bridgewood. Emily was laid to rest in the graveyard of St. Mary, and her murder was never solved. A229 is close to a route regularly used by Emily when alive. It was a lonely place then, and more remote in 1831, when it was the site of a grisly murder. John Annybird Pell, age 14, was accused of killing Richard Faulkner Taylor, age 13. Like Emily Trigg, Taylor had disappeared, and his body was found several weeks later lying in a ditch. He was decomposed, but by blood on his clothes, there was no doubt he had been murdered. A doctor who examined the body said the boy had died of a throat wound inflicted by a sharp instrument. Soon a corroded, white, horn-handled knife, suspected to be the murder weapon, was found. The knife belonged to John Bell, who had 2 sons, John Amy Bird Bell and James Bell. They lived in a poorhouse close to the spot where Taylor was murdered. When questioned, James, the younger one, confessed they killed Taylor in the wood and that he had been the lookout. The brothers had planned to murder the boy who was known to carry money on certain days of the month. John Bell was executed by hanging, and his body was turned over to the surgeons at Rochester for dissection. 8,000 people attended the execution. In 1939, Fred Sanders, a Chatham dockyard worker, was a ghost hunter by hobby. He had gone looking for the ghost of an old man who was the bailiff to Anne West of Old Bay Hall, who was then a ruin. She died more than 100 years before and left instructions that she was to be buried in an open tomb, and her bailiff was to bring her food and water to the graveside every day for a year. He carried out her instruction for a few months, then disappeared. Fred Sanders claimed to have been tapped on the shoulder by what he suspected was the bailiff when he went to the graveyard. He told the newspapers that he planned to visit a lonely farmhouse near Rochester where a servant girl who was suspected of stealing had hanged herself in the barn. In June 1939, his next investigation took him to Bluebell Hill near Chatham to watch for a ghostly horseman who was said to go galloping about a field where he was murdered 100 years before. Strangely, his fiancée who accompanied him was named Emily Trigg, and she lived near the scene of where Faulkner's body was found 100 years before and her namesake's body was unearthed. What are the chances on that? This girl named Emily Trigg is killed in 1916. It's never solved. About 30-some years later, there's a guy investigating. He's like an early ghost hunter, and his fiance's name is Emily Trigg. Okay. In July 1939, Fred Sanders, the ghost hunter, found himself in another churchyard near the village of Pluckley. This time he was accompanied by a fellow dock worker named Douglas Bennett. They went to lay the ghost of Lady Daring, which was said to haunt the churchyard. Allegedly, Lady Daring upon her death was encased in 4 leaden coffins, as ordered by her husband so her beauty would be preserved, which was not exactly accurate, since she was 74 years old when she died in 1704, and her husband had been dead 20 years. By December, Fred Sanders, who bicycled to his destinations with sandwiches and a flask of tea, did a 2-hour vigil in a graveyard near Rochester Cathedral looking for the ghost of Charles Dickens, who was said to walk the neighborhood at Christmas time. After this last excursion, nothing more was heard of Fred Sanders. Perhaps it has something to do with the fact that he almost froze to death while traipsing around the graveyard. While the reason as to why Lady Daring was buried in a leaded coffin was more of an urban myth, she, indeed, had not one but 2 ghost stories tied to her. She was born Mary Harvey and came from a forward-looking merchant family who gave her a well-rounded education. In 1645, at age 16, she married William Hawke, her father's former apprentice and her cousin, without her family's consent. Her father quickly had the marriage annulled. 3 years later, she married wealthy Sir Edward Daring and set up home at Surrenden, Kent. She was tutored in music by Henry Laws, a court musician, and she learned to compose. She composed 3 pieces, making her the first woman in England whose compositions were published under her own name. In between her compositions, she gave birth to 17 children, 10 which reached adulthood. She is linked to a ghost known as the Red Lady who haunts the grounds of the church. This moniker came about because a red rose was supposedly laid next to her body. She is said to wander the graveyard looking for the unmarked grave of her stillborn child. The second story involves the White Lady. Surrenden Manor dates back to the 12th century and was destroyed by fire in 1952 while it was the Northaw Surrenden Preparatory School for Boys. It was said that a ghost haunted the library, and she was frequently seen by Americans who used the estate as an extension of the embassy during the years between the World Wars. In 1899, Walter W. Winans, an American sportsman and millionaire, had moved to Surrenden. One Christmas Eve, he held a solo vigil with his hunting rifle for company to await the arrival of the ghost. The White Lady appeared, and he shot at her, which didn't stop her considering she was a phantom. The bullet buried itself in paneling. He moved out shortly thereafter in the fall of 1915. The estate was then acquired by the Canadian government as a convalescent home for wounded soldiers of the Dominion. 5 years later, Walter Winans dropped dead while racing horses at Parslows Park. Ghost stories abound, and so does the list of suspects as to who is the restless shade seen through the years in the vicinity of A229. So really, everybody looks at that accident of the girls losing their lives on the eve of the wedding, but in fact, the usual suspect. There's lots of usual suspects. You know, they seem they number in the dozens. So anyway, I will be back soon again with some more eerie and weird news. And until then, take care.